Hey, Patrick here. This is a video that I've wanted to make kind of since day one of starting this channel. I spend a lot of time talking to other people about their records and their favorite stuff, and I get to chime in every once in a while, but what I really want to do here is do a deep dive into my personal favorite genre of all time, and that is power pop. In a nutshell, power pop is the more tuneful side of the early punk movement. Think harmonies, melodies, but still distortion, still guitar solos, still some attitude to it. Power pop, right? So some of these bands are like heavy on the pop and there's very little power, and some of these bands have the opposite, but they're all kind of under this spectrum. This is the crash course in power pop. Power pop kind of comes and goes as far as music trends go. Even just looking like post 2000, it's kind of like hardcore, garage rock, power pop, hardcore, garage rock, power pop. And I love this cycle because I like all those genres, but power pop is like my favorite shit of all time. I will say it's a term that I see pretty often thrown around bands that they're catchy or they have hooks, but they got no business calling themselves power pop, in my opinion. And as much as I love several of the revival sort of eras of the genre, to me, there's nothing better than that late 70s to early 80s sweet spot. And that's what I want to talk about today. I'm not one of those guys that's going to tell you that it was better in my day, because none of this was my day. This was all pre my day. But I did come up during one of the more prominent sort of revival waves of the genre. The late 2000s, early 2010s, Dirt Nap Records version of kind of garagey power pop. Canada was doing more than their fair share for the genre at that time. Perhaps I'll dive into that in a different video, but not this one. I pulled about 100 records that I'm going to talk about in this video. Trust me when I say I could have made it 200 and it still wouldn't have been enough. It was pretty hard to narrow this down. My thinking is that this video could be an education for the uninitiated, straight to the deep end of power pop. But even if you're deep, I think you still might discover some stuff here. All it takes is one track, one good song. A lot of these bands put out 1 7-inch, 2 songs on it, and the B-side sucks. Again, there's early 70s power pop, and that stuff's great in its own right, but what I want to talk about is kind of just a couple years later when it really starts to bubble up. So I really thought long and hard about how to categorize all these power pop bands, and I came up with the power pop compass. There were several versions of this on sticky notes and napkins on my desk. And then I had my friend Tad Keys, sup Tad, put the chart together for me. It's my contention that all power pop bands can fit somewhere on this chart. So let me take just a second here to say, on my Patreon, there's going to be a version of this video where every single band I talk about has an audio sample of the record I'm talking about. The YouTube version, which you might be watching now, is only going to have what I can get away with. Membership starts at $2 a month, and I give away a free good record from my collection to 1 subscriber every month. Draw names out of a hat, mail it to you at my cost. Check it out. You can see we've got 4 categories here, and the first one I want to talk about is wimpy. Now, wimpy, not a pejorative. It's just my preferred nomenclature for this top left quadrant for bands that look more to the Beatles than they do the Kinks or the Who or the more kind of transgressive side of pop music. And so for this category, the first 2 names that come to my mind are Brothers in Arms, Dwight Twilley, and Phil Seymour. Clearly a fashion inspiration for power poppers such as myself. They're here for the pop tunes. If the guitars get distorted, well, that's kind of a happy accident. We also have the groups that I like to say whisper loudly, like Shoes and Pez Band.
Don't say goodbye, 'cause you're the one that I need. Wait a minute, baby, wait a minute, tell me what you're doing.
But in my opinion, the best anchor for this wimpy category of power pop is a New York City mid to late 70s band that honestly does not get talked about that much in the greater conversation about New York punk and New York rock and roll. And I would say that it's probably because they are very pop and very little power. That's Milk and Cookies. I'll be totally honest, and maybe you could already tell, some of my absolute favorite bands fit in this category, but I think that the bands that define this category aren't necessarily my favorites. No judgment, I just like power pop. The next quadrant, top right, we've got new wave. Of course, not all new wave is power pop, but some power pop is new wave. For this quadrant, think hooks, but more keyboards than guitars. But not no guitars. Sometimes even a drum machine. I really wanted to use Devo as the anchor for this quadrant, even though they're definitely new wave, and they definitely write pop songs. They just don't have their roots in this sort of like guitar, rock, pop, enough to call them power pop in good faith. So the first band that really comes to mind for like new wave power pop, the Cars. If you wanted Devo to be more rooted in like American pop music, I think this is what you would wind up with. This record spent over 2.5 years on the charts after it came out and sold like 6 million copies. This is not an obscure record, but this is a very good example of new wavy power pop. We also got some bigger, dancier numbers like Yellow Pills by 2020, a classic of the genre.
Everybody's feeling groovy. Everybody's got tight pants on.
I think Kim Wilde also belongs in this category.
Friday night and everyone's moving. I can feel the heat, but it's soothing heading down.
And the absolutely not a one-hit wonder, Vapors. You know Turning Japanese, but if you haven't listened to the rest of this record or their second record, and you're watching this video, check this out.
You just sit at home and watch news at 10. And the pubs will be closed and you won't have...
You're very likely to find this in the dollar bin of your closest record store. Maybe the $5 or $10 bin at this point. But when I was a teenager and I was buying a lot of these records, $1 all day long. But in the end, as an anchor for the new wave quadrant, for the power pop compass, I went with the Units. Definitely new wave, definitely pop music, definitely keyboardy, but I think that they're a better representation for what I'm doing here today than Devo.
Saw Johnny tonight, but we didn't say hello to each other. We're all moving pretty fast.
Okay, so for this third quadrant, bottom left, classic rock. So for classic rock, think like FM radio bangers on like the tastier side of guitar rock. This is also kind of where I'm putting some of the more foundational bands of the genre. An early consideration for anchor was Todd Rundgren. Rundgren produced so many good records, but his album, Something Anything, has a couple absolute power pop bangers on there. And I love a solo project. Todd Rundgren played everything on that record, and he was not a drummer, and if you listen to the drums on that record, you can tell, but he's playing for the songs, so it doesn't really matter. There's also sort of like the cheaper radio hits of a guy like Rick Springfield.
You know, I wish that I had Jesse's girl.
Or on the more foundational side of things, we've got like the Raspberries, who in a sense have as big of a role in this whole conversation as the Beatles do for a lot of these bands. And an argument can be made for my boy Tom here. Maybe the biggest culprit of classic rock radio power pop, especially with American Girl.
Take it easy, baby. Make it last all night.
But to me, I think that there is no better example of classic rock power pop than Rockford, Illinois' own Cheap Trick. Those first few records, including this one, are packed with so many hooks and so much like almost punk attitude that I think if these were not released by a major label, instead like some sort of like local private press, these would be massive collector items. But instead, you get to buy them for like 10, 20 bucks. And the last quadrant here, I would say my favorite, punk. Much like these other categories, not all punk is power pop, but some power pop is kind of coincidentally punk. Sometimes it's legit punk bands that have a proclivity for hooks, like Chula Vista's The Zeros. All of these singles are worth checking out. There's some reissue compilations as well that are worth grabbing.
Always want me to come, but I don't wanna.
Sometimes it's more pop-oriented bands that are just too keyed up to like lock in with a click track, like Belgian punk's Hubble Bubble. That's fake punk legend Plastic Bertrand on drums there. This is what he was doing before he went solo. One of my favorite subsects of this whole chart is a bunch of teenagers with no budget who accidentally make a masterpiece. The Tights from Worcester. Red Records. This has been reissued a time or two. This is honestly a perfect record. You've also got the fiercely DIY approach of a band like Moto. But to me, There's no better anchor point for this punk quadrant of the chart than our lords and saviors, the Ramones. They're literally 60s bubblegum songs played faster than anybody thought possible at that time. I mentioned my Patreon giveaway records earlier. This is this month's giveaway record. Membership starts at $2 a month, and if I draw your name out of the hat, I'm gonna mail you this for free. Okay, so that's kind of how the chart works. There's a couple more guardrails I want to go over here. You can see that there's the left half, and then there's the right half as well. The left half being like non-punk or pre-punk hemisphere. That is not to say that these bands are not punk. That is to say that they're more influenced by the kind of like pre-1977 rock and roll than they are post. On the right half, by the same logic, these are not post-punk bands. These are just bands that are more influenced or a part of music from like after 1977. Now for the bullseye. This sort of inner circle is going to get pretty tight by the end of this video, but there's one power popper who I think encompasses all four of these categories better, or maybe worse, than anybody else does. At one point or another in his career, he's been in each of these categories, and that is my man, Elvis. The first LP, My Name Is True, is somewhere between classic rock and wimp. The second record, This Year's Model, somewhere between punk and new wave. The following records are kind of like a slow descent into adult contemporary, bigger and bigger hats. Your mileage may vary. These two are the best ones. I give him like another maybe 3 or 4 LPs after this. Most people don't. Quick interruption here. If you're looking for sleeves, consider Vinyl Storage Solutions. They make inners, outers, 7-inch, 10-inch LP, gatefold, pockets, double pockets, flaps. They make it all. They make it all. It's a Canadian company, so the exchange rate is really good for Americans. And there's free shipping once you hit the minimum order. You can get 10% off your order with the coupon code PACKRAT. Okay, so here's a band that is basically always included in this conversation of power pop, and rightfully so, because they are the best. Originally from San Francisco, but relocated to LA in 1977, The Nerves.
I heard your mother, now she's going out the door. Did you go to work or just go to the store?
They self-released this, their only EP, their only record. I read this somewhere once, but perhaps you can confirm for me. The white back version came out first when they were still based in San Francisco, and then the black back version was the second press after they relocated to LA. Just a little show and tell. I get a lot of people asking me about this flyer from my background. This is the first and only time they ever played Toronto, 1977, with the Diodes at the Crash and Burn. Flyer for their weekly residency in San Francisco before they moved to LA. And here's a handbill from New York, Max's Kansas City, same tour where they played Toronto. Just gonna throw this out here. If you have any flyers or any ephemera from The Nerves, or honestly, any bands I'm talking about today, I like paper, flyers, posters, promos, almost as much as I like records. So if you've got some cool stuff and you wanna get rid of it, hit me up. So as I said, The Nerves only ever really did one tour of America. Then they pretty quickly broke up, and they all splintered, and they all started different bands. All of those bands are good. None of them are as good as The Nerves. Drummer Paul Collins started his solo project, The Beat, sometimes referred to as Paul Collins Beat. And rumor has it even did a little bit of ghostwriting for the M&Ms. Jack Lee went solo.
Just come back and stay for this time.
And Peter Case started the Plimsolls, who you may recognize from Valley Girl. And of course, what kind of music talker guy would I be without mentioning Blondie's cover of Hanging on the Telephone, which introduced most people to The Nerves. More interesting than that, though, is something I don't hear a lot of people talk about, and that's the other song on this record that Jack Lee wrote for Blondie. Will Anything Happen by Blondie, side B, track 2, also written by Jack Lee. Go back and listen to that song and tell me that it's not a Jack Lee guitar line, a classic Jack Lee guitar line. Because it is.
I said you could make it. Just don't forget that I said.
And while Blondie definitely started out as a punk band, they deviated far too fast for me to put them any further south on this chart here. Unlike a band like the Rosillos, who firmly had one foot planted in punk and new wave the entire time, from day one.
There's this red approaching from the stars. All the horrors of Venus and Mars. Everybody back up beyond.
And if you think that the Nerves should have been the biggest band in the world, well, wait until you hear about the Incredible Kid Band. They put out a few more 7-inches than the Nerves did, but they disappeared basically just as fast. They rebranded a couple times. The Kicks, then We're Only Human. And to my knowledge, I don't think any of these guys ever really popped up in other bands down the line either. And there's a lot of reissues of Kid Band material, including this one, this double LP. We got 30 demos on this record. And this is one of those bands that you don't need to be scared of the unreleased demos, the live material, the outtakes. It's all incredible.
I can still see the lights staring at me like they used to do. I'm fighting my way back, girl, till I'm back there with you.
For my dollar, Kid Band are the most underrated power pop band in this whole conversation. Another giant of the genre I want to talk about quick, the Real Kids. Side 1, track 1, All Kinds of Girls. Maybe the best indicator of the genre out there.
All kinds of girls, fall in love again.
It's Power Pop 101, but it's essential. Okay, so let's take a step back chronologically. I said I wasn't going to talk about too much of like kind of the really early power pop stuff, but there's one very important band I want to tackle. Big Star. While not always powerful, their pop became the blueprint for so many of these bands that I'm talking about today, especially a little bit later on the 90s stuff. I feel like a lot of the 90s power pop bands really went back to Big Star. If you're skeptical, second record, side 2, track 5, September Girls.
September girls, this so much. I was your butch.
These are both reissues, and I would trade heavy for originals. And even though he wasn't there on the second record, I mean, his influence was on the second record, but he wasn't physically there for the second record. Chris Bell. This is a very special power pop record.
Every night I tell myself I am the cosmos.
Despite what some might say, I think the Bay City Rollers belong here as well. They're wimpy, but you can't deny those hooks. Hiding in kind of plain classic rock sight, Badfinger.
What can I do? What can I say?
Earlier on, I mentioned Todd Rundgren as a producer. Badfinger's one of those cases. Maybe a little out of left field, but I want to include the Sweet also. A lot of people get tied up in like Sweet versus Slade. Slade, all day long. But that doesn't mean that this record doesn't rule. And even though it's like very much so like a glam record, I think that those like synthy hooks earn them a place in this chart. I also want to throw out the lesser talked about Juke, and really like the Trevor White solo material that followed after this.
Crazy kids, teenage, crazy kids for me.
They don't really have anything to do with the power pop evolutionary sort of timeline, but fuck, what a song. And rounding out the kind of like early 70s sort of power pop building blocks, a band that doesn't get talked about enough, Rockin' Horse.
I'm gonna tell the biggest gossip in town to keep a secret.
Early 70s, Liverpool, Mersey beat type stuff. A lot of this sounds like the Beatles, and that's because the main guy behind the band, Jimmy Campbell, was playing in the Cavern Club, and he was from that 60s scene. And if you take Rockin' Horse and you pepper just even like a little bit more McCartney in there, I think you wind up with a guy like Emmett Rhodes. Another solo artist. He's playing every instrument on this record.
Now she's gone away just in time to say I'll see you sometime.
Not a guy you hear talked about very much, but pretty good chance you can find this in a record store near you for like 10, 20 bucks. You can blame them for creating pop punk, or you can credit them for being one of the best bands of all time, the Buzzcocks. They are, to me, the undeniable masters of like weaponizing guitar leads and melancholic lyrics to make easily some of the best music on this whole chart. Drummer John Marr was like 16 when they signed their first contract, and so his parents had to sign for him. Big fan of his like one-of-a-kind drum style. Steve Diggle's book from 2025, very good read. And it really just makes me wish that Pete Shelley had the chance to write a book before he died. Because I've read so many of his lyrics in my life that I would just love to read a few more. If Pete Shelley's first solo LP, Homo Sapien, came out as the 4th Buzzcocks record, as intended, I'd have to push them a little further north to New Wave. But luckily for us, and for Pete, but not for Diggle and co., it didn't play out that way. Of course, one of the high water marks of the genre, I can't believe it's taking me this long in the video to actually get to them, the undertones. Teenage Kicks will forever be one of the best power pop songs, one of the best songs. Of course, legendary BBC DJ John Peel played it twice in a row on his radio show.
But here's the record, Undertones and Teenage Kicks, what a treat. I'll tell you what, I've not done this for ages, but I think we ought to hear that again. Hold on a second, just talk among yourselves. Listen this, when you listen to it this time, those of you who are familiar with the work of Loudon Wainwright, last time I played it, the pig said, that lead singer sounds like Loudon Wainwright at times. It may sound a bit fanciful, but listen to it again and see what you think. An excuse for playing it twice.
It's punk in attitude and the simplicity, but synthy, rocky, wimpy enough sometimes to wind them kind of in the middle of the chart. Similar situation with The Only Ones, whose track Another Girl, Another Planet has rightfully so earned its place on like the Mount Rushmore of power pop tracks.
I think I'm on another world with you.
This band is like a little more nuanced than Another Girl Will Lead You to Believe. That's like a great entry point, but the rest of their music is like way more sort of moody and melancholic. I love it, but if you're gonna check this out because you want like 13 versions of Another Girl, you're not gonna get it. I keep wanting to say like another personal favorite, but all of these records are personal favorites, but this one is truly a personal favorite. The Scientists from Australia.
Just got stood up, made my mind up that it never happen again.
They've got tunes on like the punkier side, like Pissed on Another Planet, but Frantic Romantic is like the sugariest, sweetest power pop song out there, and that kind of like lands them somewhere in the middle here. Not long after this era of the band, they go into like swamp rock, which is where they stay for like the rest of their career. And the sort of spiritual little brother band to the Scientists, we've got the Riptides.
77 Sunset Street, boy, boys and girls are gonna find you out. 77 Sunset.
They walk a similar line, although for an even shorter amount of time. And in a way, you can kind of hear the beach. You can hear the summer in the Riptides. On a similar sort of like summer tip, we got bands like the Barracudas, we got The Crowd, and we got Vancouver's Young Canadians. They started as the K-Tels, very quickly got sued by K-Tel Records, and rebranded as the Young Canadians for 2 EPs before breaking up. There's also bands that were like very punk, but kind of accidentally had hooks. And under that category, I would put, also from Australia, the Fun Things.
When the permanent flies, there'll be no doubt he's gonna take control and wipe you out.
An original of this is, without a doubt, #1 on my want list. And speaking of my want list, and speaking of like the catchier side of punk, I would also put Italy's Ice and the Iced in a similar position, where they're like definitely a punk band, but kind of accidentally have hooks.
I realize that the moral of the story is that you're always stupid. I just want to spend it safe. We've had enough now.
Not far off from there is where I would put Nasty Facts.
I'm not as strong as I look. I'm not as stoned as I seem.
These are a bunch of kids. Look at this. Also, I'm totally convinced that they just like got one of their older brothers to play like the ripping guitar solo on this record. And again, similar situation with Canada's Bureaucrats. They got a very unique blend of like UK and Canadian influence because brothers Gary and Mitch Sidwell moved from Leicester to Ottawa, started this band. I hear a lot of people say fake British accents on this record. Not fake. Real. Just in Canada. And what kind of power pop conversation would this be without Milwaukee's The Shivers?
When I was younger, so you tell me that the time has come.
Another band whose only 7-inch fetches big bucks, but even more rare than that is a band whose unreleased material is just as good as the released stuff. You got the 2 songs from the 7-inch on here, and then you've also got 10 unreleased songs from that era. Also from Milwaukee, and also cripplingly expensive, we got the Haskells.
So you call me on the phone, you say you are alone, and I can come over later. Yes, I'm not gonna...
This is where Wimpy just edges out over new wave. I don't have a copy of this one. Another stalwart of unreleased good records, we've got Protex. From Belfast, their first 7-inch came out on Good Vibrations Records, and certainly if you're this deep into this video and you don't know about the label Good Vibrations Records, take a detour. I promise it's worth it. They put out a handful of singles, and then they recorded this album and heard it and didn't like it and chose not to release it and instead broke up. Fast forward to 2008, and once again, Sing Sing Records blows the dust off these master tapes, finds out this record is incredible, and releases it for the first time.
Is it a crime to need someone for longer than just one night? You don't give a damn for me.
It blows my mind that anybody could write and record a record that sounds like this, hear it back, and choose to bin it. In general, a lot of the early Irish punk, especially like the Northern Irish punk, kind of skews more power pop. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And if I had to pick like one country, one scene that was my favorite out of all of this stuff, it's without a doubt Belfast in like that 78 to 80 period. You got labels like Good Vibrations Records, Rip Off Records, releasing debut EPs from all these brand new bands, some of which blew up, some of which did not. This is the scene where Stiff Little Fingers comes out of. But one guy who I don't hear talked about very much is Clive Culbertson. So he was from this band called No Sweat. Sometimes they were The Sweat. Sometimes he was just Clive Culbertson. There's also the Tearjerkers, the Tin Openers.
One time, a 2 time, a part time, a love affair, a 1 time. I'm not your type. I'm not your type.
And they kind of feel like the minor leagues compared to the heavy hitters, but all of these are worth checking out. Especially Good Vibrations #1, Rudy. Good Vibes is known for these like fold out sleeves that are like made from one sheet of paper, folded out to like make a pocket sleeve. The last stop on the Irish train is the Moondogs. It's not from this record, but they probably definitely got ripped off by Blitz on this track. Okay, moving over to like the more wave side of things. Let's fill out that side of the chart here. The Romantics. They were more than just What I Like About You, but not too much more. The Rubinoos had their share of hits, for sure, but none bigger than the one that they wound up suing Avril Lavigne over.
I gotta tell ya, hey, you, I wanna be a boyfriend and try to say I wanna be your #1.
We got the whole clean, sort of skinny tie power pop, like the Jags, not far off the DBs. We got the Fans, the Bats, and I would even kind of lump maybe Nikki and the Corvettes over here as well.
I got your number, you written on the back of my head. I got your I don't enjoy you anymore. Well, I guess you gotta hold on me, giving me that look in your eyes. And I
a popgun. The shot never kills and you have your fun. And all your thrills and
You make me crazy. You make me crazy.
No derogative, but I've always called it dollar bin power pop, despite some of these being worth a lot more than that. More dollar bin examples, we got like Bram Tchaikovsky, the Poppies, Joe Jackson.
Jealousy, you gotta let her be. Pretty soon now, you know I'm gonna make a comeback.
And I'm gonna lock Joe down over just a little bit into the classic rock camp over there. But the actual kings of dollar bin power pop, we've got the Records, and we've got the Knack.
I don't wanna argue. I ain't gonna budge. Let me out, come get me out, baby, beware.
My Sharona by the Knack, I know you know, the best-selling song of 1979. Number 1 on the charts for 6 weeks, 22 weeks in total. I think that very likely serves as kind of the apex of the genre, at least commercially. After that point, the world didn't really want more power pop. And for that reason, this record is very cheap. The drum production on this record is top tier, one of the best on my shelf. Put this on with headphones, listen to the drums, tell me I'm wrong. And of course, it's also a ripoff of Elvis Costello. Pump it up. And going back to Elvis Costello, we've got Nick Lowe.
I can take another heartache, though you say you're my friend.
I think a lot of the pub rockers belong on this chart as well, maybe none more so than Nick Lowe. Pure Pop for Now People, as it was branded in North America, Jesus of Cool everywhere else. Even if he did nothing else, Cruel to Be Kind would land him a place on this chart. Of course, I also want to include Dave Edmunds in this as well. Now, I thought about including some of the poppier tracks from the television personalities, but they just get too arty too often to really belong on here. However, lucky for me, they've got lots of side projects, one of which, The Times, definitely belongs here. This is the mod revival side project of TVP, led by Ed Ball as opposed to Dan Tracy. And this is definitely like the closest that camp came to like consistent power pop records. Now, they might not like to hear this, but in my opinion, the best of the mod revival stuff coming out of England in the late 70s is basically just well-dressed power pop. Original mod stuff, obviously far more context going in there. Reggae, soul, garage, early rock and roll. The revivalists, however, perhaps none bigger than the Jam, especially on this track going underground, that's power pop.
The public gets what the public wants, but I want nothing society's got.
And of course, if we dig just a little bit deeper, we've got the Circles. This one is a top 10 mod revival track for me. For me, it is hard not to peel the wallpaper off when this track hits.
Do you think that it's wrong? We died in a song, just when the thought the
And we even got a little bit of mod revival out of Stiv Bader's post Dead Boys. A lot of this like mod Stiv stuff is covers, but the track Make Up Your Mind, kind of half written with David Quinton, you're never going to be the same again after you hear that tune.
But I can't waste my time. Make up your mind.
But to me, there is no better mod revival than Malmo Sweden's The Moderns.
Got to have pop. Got to have pop.
Perfectly titled, perfectly branded, perfectly executed. The Year of Today EP is up there with The Nerves and Kid Abant. In fact, I did a reissue of this 7-inch on my label back in 2015. It's a lot cheaper than an original, and you can still find it out there if you're looking. Vibrators. There was punk as you could get in 1977, but there's monster hooks on this record. This is a promo copy. It's kind of cool.
Drive the black Cadillac. Which has birds in the back.
Similar situation with London's The Boys. I actually saw these guys last night. As of when I'm recording this, like 12 hours ago, I was watching them play half the songs on this record. And then somewhere in the middle there, I'm going to put the Wasps. This track, Teenage Treats, I don't DJ without this song in my box. Earlier, I said Wimpy's not my favorite, but some of my favorites land there, and I think maybe the best example of that is this, The Letters.
But you don't love me. No, you don't love me. And I just don't know where this will lead.
This record drove me crazy trying to find it. But I got it. Doesn't matter what you're looking for, if you look long enough, you're gonna find it. Toronto's B-Girls were an early entrant into Canadian punk scene. Some of their unreleased material is a little bit more punk, but Fun at the Beach, definitely a wimpy power pop song.
I wanna stay out, have a way out time at the beach tonight. I wanna stay.
And much like the Toronto's B-Girls caught the attention of the New York scene, Vancouver's Pointed Sticks caught the attention of Stiff Records from London.
But baby, baby, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? Say that I need you.
Making them the first Canadian band ever signed to Stiff Records, and the first Canadian band ever dropped from Stiff Records. They got halfway through recording the first LP, things went south, the label dropped them, they came back to Canada, and Quintessence Records ended up putting out their album. But this is the first single, several different sleeves available on this one, all the early 7 inches, perfection. Also released on Vancouver's Quintessence, The Modernettes. This is one of my favorite designed records.
10,000 teens can't be wrong. 10,000 teens where I belong.
There's really nothing quite like this record. Even they couldn't do this again on their second and third EP. And if you like Pointed Stick style of caffeinated, woesome, brokenhearted, keyboardy punk, I think you might also dig De Cylinders from Amsterdam.
I am not very serious. I am not impecunious. So what am I gonna do?
Imagine Pointed Sticks with a girl singer, and you're not far off on this one. Of course, we also got the Bangles, who started off as the more punk Bangs. And while LA doesn't really get as much fanfare as New York and London do for early punk scenes, it's definitely number 3 on the list, which gave us the Dickies. They straddle the line between punk and new wave. They're very keyboardy, but also early punk. I believe the first of the LA punk bands to get signed by a major label, but I contend that the real winner in the LA punk meets new wave middle ground is the Eyes. Even though Danger House put out lots of incredible stuff, this is my favorite. Take a Quaalude now. And of course, LA also gave us the Go-Go's, who started quite punk and became quite power pop and then grew into something way bigger than both of those terms. There's also a personal favorite, which I don't have, Dow Jones and the Industrials. Their sort of accidental catchiness and overdriven keyboards lands them pretty close to the Dickies' Eyes territory, albeit from the Midwest. Now, there's one thing that I really haven't talked about yet, and that's the crossover between classic rock and punk. This bottom middle section. I put all the mod revival bands not far from there because the Who influence, the pub rockers are not far from there for obvious reasons. I think that there's also a lower subset of bands between these two quadrants that we can talk about. And the band that comes to mind for me is the Flamin' Groovies. They started as a response to the San Francisco hippies in the late 60s, put out several albums in the early 70s. Eventually they changed lead singers. But it really wasn't until 1976 they put out Shake Some Action that they really sort of cracked into the punky classic rock power pop territory.
Take some action's what I need. So let me bust out at full speed.
The song Shake Some Action, along with Teenage Kicks and Starry Eyes and Another Girl, Another Planet, you're gonna hear these at every power pop DJ night you go to. Produced by Dave Edmunds and put out by Sire in '76, right as things were exploding. That should tell you everything you need to know. One band that I intentionally left off the pub rock section was Eddie and the Hot Rods. It's punk, it's rockin', it's very power pop. Plus, this record has caused a million power pop bands to do this in their promo photos. And rounding out this lower middle section, we got the 1-2 punch of New York's Dictators and Hamilton, Ontario's Teenage Head.
Set me free. I might know better.
Someday you remember me and picture my face.
Both of these bands started before punk sort of codified, but they both occupy this kind of sweet spot, right as things were getting going with punk, that just hit perfectly. We've also got the Toms, which is a solo project by a guy named Tom.
Undercover in town.
got the Quick, whose sort of brand of like Beatles meets Sparks power pop, to be perfectly honest, doesn't always hit me the right way. But if you're a fan of the genre, you gotta have it. You may not see this coming, but I also think that there's a case to be made for split ends, especially on a track like 6 Months in a Leaky Boat.
I just spent 6 months in a leaky boat. Lucky just to keep afloat.
And we got Squeeze, or UK Squeeze, if you will. Not on this record, but their chorusless hit, Up the Junction, is on most of my playlists at this point.
I never thought it would happen with me and a girl from Clapham.
And rounding out New Wave, I also wanted to include XTC, who might be like one of the weirder bands on this chart. The Speedies. They put out 2 7-inches. I kind of flip-flop between which one I like more. This is sort of the hit, but I tend to play Something on My Mind most of all.
I've got something on my mind, and if you've got the time.
This sleeve always makes me laugh because I feel like every person in this band is in a different band. And rounding out the wimpy corner, I want to throw out 2 sort of underappreciated and obscure bands, Teacher's Pet and The Innocents. Both impossible to find 7-inches, yet mandatory.
Now you're missing, boy. You're a missing person. You're missing, boy. You're a missing person.
When will this one-way love end? Going my
So I didn't really talk about much after the early 80s because, again, I wanted to stick to this sort of the golden age. But there are 2 bands that I want to throw out there that came later that I think had a big impact on the genre. The first one being Teenage Fan Club from the 90s.
I didn't want to hurt you.
I'm not a big fan of 90s power pop, but I think Teenage Fan Club's unique approach was like shoegaze meets Big Star, and that was something that nobody had really done before, and then a lot of the 90s bands sort of emulated after them. And the other one is a 2000s band, The Exploding Hearts.
I'm a pretender at the game of love. Need somebody help me shout my heart.
They were, at their core, 77 revivalists, but they ended up doing a lot more than just reviving sort of that 77 attitude. This band's got a story. If you're here at the end of the video, I think you probably know the story, and if you don't, maybe I'll tell in a different video. And I want to include both these bands because not only did they serve the genre with love, they also pushed it forward in a meaningful way. Okay, so who did I miss? Like I said, there's so many power pop bands that released one record. Some of them I have, some of them I don't have. This genre, as you can no doubt tell, is very near and dear to my heart. So maybe more than any of the other videos, please head down to the comments. I would love to hear what you have to think. And real quick, just before we end, I post my videos on Patreon before I post them on YouTube. You can get around YouTube advertisements that way. There's additional song samples on there. Membership starts at $2 a month, and it automatically includes you into the monthly raffle that I do for a free record. I don't give away crappy records. I give away good records that I like, that I think people will like. Used records, sometimes rare records. Okay? Thank you very much.